I don't need my name on a magazine cover. I don't need a pat on the back or applause. I just need one thing. Welcome, founder. And when the staff bowed and said exactly that in front of everyone who once pushed me out of the picture, I smiled. They thought I wouldn't dare show up. They thought I'd stay quiet, playing the part of Greg's wife, the obedient shadow in the proud Brooks family. But they forgot one thing. That resort they're live streaming with so much hype, the place they call a family legacy, was built on my blood, my tears, my sleepless nights, and risky loan deals. I wasn't invited to the grand opening. My name was wiped from the guest list. My seat was handed off to a friend of Candace, my sister-in-law, who's always treated me like some useless accessory. But I didn't need an invitation. I had ownership. I had contracts. I had the truth. And that night, as Candace stood center stage, raising a glass to family and tradition, a staff member stepped into frame, looked me in the eye, and said, "It's an honor to welcome Elena Brooks, founder of this resort." The whole ballroom fell silent. The live stream froze. And me? I was only just beginning to reclaim the place that was always mine. This isn't a story of revenge. This is a story of rebirth. Are you ready? I always start my morning with a cup of black coffee and no sugar. I drink it from a chipped white ceramic mug, the one with a tiny crack near the handle. I haven't replaced it. That little flaw reminds me, sometimes the imperfect things are the ones we hold onto the longest. Sunlight pours through the kitchen window, spilling across the stone countertop, casting a gentle glow like the kind of peaceful morning I used to imagine I'd have. Greg had already left early, his aftershave still lingering in the air, along with a few burnt toast crumbs left behind in the toaster. I sat at the table, opened my phone just to check my calendar. But my finger froze mid-swipe when I saw a single story post. A boomerang on Instagram, from one of Greg's nieces, ocean waves in the background, a sparkling glass of champagne, everyone smiling wide at some upscale beach resort. I zoomed in. There it was, the curved wooden bridge, the string of globe lights, the tiny resort logo tucked into the corner. The place I'd spent 3 years building. The resort I once planned hand in hand with a designer. The dream I'd stayed up countless nights defending to an investment board. The caption read, "Family Legacy Launch Couldn't Wait Any Longer." My chest sank. I kept scrolling. Another story. A short video. Candace, my sister-in-law, barefoot on the boardwalk, champagne in hand, her hair floating gently in the breeze. She turned to the camera and said, "We're so proud of this legacy. A true symbol of the Brooks spirit." I didn't see my face anywhere. Not in the photos, not in the videos, not a single mention. I opened the Brooks Legacy Club group chat, the one Greg added me to back when his niece got married. It was gone. Probably deleted me quietly. Last time I appeared in that chat was last year, after I mistakenly suggested Thanksgiving be held somewhere neutral instead of at Candace's estate. I still remember the cold silence through that Zoom screen. I checked my email. No invite. No itinerary. No thank you note. No me. The worst part wasn't being excluded. It was realizing the exclusion wasn't accidental. It was intentional. My phone buzzed. A message from Candace. Not sent to me, just a screenshot of a private group chat. A VIP guest list. One name scratched out in red pen. Elena B. Next to it, a note. Confirmed, Allison, Candace's friend, replacing. Right after that, a short voice memo. Candace giggling. Well, hey, at least it'll be less tense this year, right? I put the phone down without responding. My jaw ached from clenching. But my hands didn't shake. That night, over dinner, I tried one more time. Greg was staring at his phone while eating, as usual. I asked softly, "Did you know the family's hosting the launch event at White Tide?" Greg looked up, eyebrows pinched. Yeah, Mom mentioned it. But I think they're still finalizing the list. You're on it though, right? I smiled, masking the bitterness. Not sure, so I thought I'd ask. He nodded vaguely and went back to checking stock prices. I'll look into it. Probably just a mix-up. He didn't look. He won't look. After dinner, I washed the dishes by hand, one by one, like the act might anchor me in the middle of the quiet storm slowly pulling me under. That night, I didn't cry. I just lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Every time I blinked, I saw Candace raising that glass, mouthing the words, "Family spirit." What family? I wasn't in it. Never was. I turned on the bedside lamp, opened the drawer, pulled out my worn leather journal and wrote just one line. No reaction. Just observe. The next morning, another message from Candace. Same sugary tone, laced with smugness. Elena, just realized we might have forgotten to save your spot at White Tide. Totally my bad. Everything moved fast this year. But we'll catch up later, can't wait. No apology. No offer to fix it. Just a done deal. I didn't reply. I just sat there, holding my cold cup of coffee, staring blankly at the white wall. And that's when it hit me. No more guessing. No more doubt. This wasn't oversight. This was a plan. And if they've decided to rewrite the story, then I'll bring the truth. Page by page, line by line. This time, I'm not knocking. I'm opening the door. And I'm taking the seat that should have been mine all along. 11 a.m. I was still sitting at the kitchen table, not dressed yet, holding a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold and watery. Not because I was lazy, but because I was gathering every scattered piece of emotion, trying to stack them into something more manageable, something that resembled a plan. My phone buzzed again. New email. From Bayshore Resort Charter Office, the management company for the resort I founded on White Tide Island. Subject. Reservation cancellation confirmation, Elena Brooks. I blinked. Cancelled reservation? I opened the email. The message was empty standard format, auto-generated. But at the very bottom, in faint gray text I almost missed, was this line. Cancellation request submitted by Candace Brooks. Date, 3 days ago. 3 days. While I was busy finalizing our Colorado expansion plan, Candace had quietly removed my name from the guest list of the very place I created. I inhaled slowly and opened the bottom drawer of the kitchen cabinet. Inside was an old folder labeled Taxes plus Ownership. I pulled out an empty manila sleeve, slid the email printout inside. It would have a new label soon. The truth. That afternoon, Greg came home smelling like ocean breeze and cheap cologne. He dropped his briefcase onto the chair, pulled a soda from the fridge, and didn't bother saying a word to me. I waited until he set the can down before I spoke. Candace messaged me again. He raised an eyebrow, took a sip. About the trip? I nodded. She said they forgot to save me a spot. Said it's full now. No space left. Greg paused just for half a second. Probably a mix-up, you know how they get with logistics. I slid the printed email toward him. This wasn't a mix-up, it was a cancellation submitted by her. 3 days ago. He didn't pick up the page. Just stared at it. Long and hard. Then looked away, scratched his head. Maybe. She thought you weren't going, or assumed you were busy? She didn't ask, I said, my voice even and steady. She just cancelled, then replaced my name. The air in the room thickened, like fog that wouldn't lift. Greg sat down without another word. He picked up his soda and spun it on the table like he was trying to find an exit hidden in the aluminum. I didn't wait for an excuse. I didn't need one anymore. That night, while he retreated into his office, I opened my laptop. Not to search for an apology, but to begin documenting. A new note. Title. Things I've let slide. First line. Not invited to the launch of the resort I built. I kept typing, faster than I expected. Not mentioned in the press interview, even as the founder. Labeled as logistics coordinator in the brochure. Candace giving tours of the office, introducing herself as the visionary behind the resort. Ziction. Greg never once corrected her. Each line was a stitch cold and clean, closing up an old wound I'd ignored for far too long. I shut the laptop at midnight. But before going to bed, I got a strange message. Not from Candace. Not from Greg. From an unknown number display name, Ariel asked to Candace. Attached was a screenshot. A chat thread between Ariel and Candace. The last line. Don't worry, she won't be coming. I handled it. I read that line 3 times. Then printed it. Folded it carefully. Filed it in the folder that was growing heavier by the day. This wasn't about plotting revenge. This was about preparing to tell the truth in a way no one could deny. And this time, I wouldn't wait for them to call my name. I would step forward with documents, receipts, and a seat they thought they had erased. Early the next morning, I left the city in my silver gray SUV. No big suitcase, no silk dresses, no bikinis like the vacations before. This trip wasn't for rest. It was a mission. In the trunk was a thick file folder. Joint ownership contracts, bank statements, investment permit 7, a printed transcript of Candace's speech from a live stream she thought was private. I placed each document in clear plastic sleeves, arranged chronologically, like a lawyer prepping for court. I arrived at the dock before the sun had fully broken through the thin veil of fog over the sea. The breeze carried a hint of salt and the distant cry of gulls. I walked slowly, heels clicking on the wooden planks, pulling a sleek carry-on behind me. Each step steady, deliberate, unshaken. Ahead was the luxury boat, towering at the dock, pure white, gleaming, with the White Tide Resort flag fluttering at the bow. Standing near the gangway, in the middle of a lively crowd, was Candace. Hair in a flawless updo, off-shoulder white dress, champagne flute in hand. As I approached, her eyes found me. The smile on her lips didn't disappear, but her gaze froze for half a second. That moment, when performance collides with reality. I didn't say a word. Just walked past, nodding once, closing the chapter on every time I ever tried to be just pleasant enough for her. The people around Candace shifted slightly, bodies angling on instinct, trying to form an invisible wall like they always had. I didn't care. I pulled my suitcase straight to the boarding ramp. A staff member in a navy blazer, resort badge on his chest, stepped forward with a professional smile. "Welcome, Miss Elena Brooks," he said loud enough for those behind me to hear. "The owner has arrived. Preparing for departure." Ovno. The dock fell silent like someone had sliced the sound with a razor blade. I didn't need to turn around to know. Candace was frozen, glass midair, clinging to her half-smile. The others straightened dresses, smoothed their hair, glanced quickly down at their phones. "You're the last guest we were waiting for," the staffer said quietly, tilting his head like he was awaiting permission. I nodded. "Let's proceed." Oh. As I stepped onto the deck, the low rumble of the engine stirred beneath my feet. The boat eased away from the dock, slow and steady, like a reminder. Things are in motion. And this time, I'm the one at the helm. Inside the main cabin, the scent of lilies and walnut wood lingered. Vases arranged just so. A long dining table draped in crisp white linen, chairs set precisely per the seating chart. My name wasn't on that chart. But I wasn't looking for it. I just needed a seat and I took it. Callista, a journalist who once interviewed me on Founders Unfiltered last year, was there too. She didn't ask anything. Just sat beside me, phone in hand, Bluetooth earpiece in, like she was mentally taking notes. I poured myself a glass of lemonade. No one approached. No one asked me for photos. But no one dared ask me to leave either. My presence was an anchor. Untouchable but accounted for. Then, like someone used to commanding a stage, Candace stepped up to the upper deck. Where the lighting hit just right, where the breeze tousled her dress at the perfect angle. Phone in hand. Live stream rolling. "Hi everyone," she cooed, voice as sweet as ever. "We're so excited to share a small piece of our family's tradition with you all. White Tide isn't just a place, it's a symbol. A legacy of the Brooks family." Callista tilted her head slightly. Her lip curled, just a little, like someone watching a play whose ending they already knew. Candace continued. "The people here today are the ones who truly understand the value of loyalty, sustainability, and..." Suddenly, from behind her, a resort staff member walked straight through the frame. He didn't even glance at the camera. Just said clearly, "Delighted to serve you again, Miss Elena Brooks, founder of White Tide." That was it. But it landed like a pin pulled from a grenade. Candace froze. Her face didn't change immediately, but her lips pressed together for half a second. The screen flickered. Callista raised her hand and counted down softly. 3, 2, 1. Comments began pouring into the live stream. "Wait, she's the founder? Brooks' legacy? More like borrowed legacy. Tell us more, Elena." Candace cut the video. Too late. The story she'd built was starting to crack. And me? I said nothing. Didn't need to. I just sat quietly, hand resting on my glass, eyes fixed on the sea. The truth doesn't need a microphone. It only needs the right moment. Candace disappeared from the upper deck just 10 minutes after cutting the livestream, leaving behind a strange hush that drifted across the boat like a cold front. No one spoke about what had just happened. But everyone knew. It was like a heavy door had slammed shut. No one had to mention the echo to remember how hard it hit. I remained in the main salon cabin, not doing anything special. Just being present. Sometimes, simply showing up at the right time, in the right place, is the loudest declaration of all. I sipped my lemonade while scanning the room. People glanced at me, then quickly looked away like they'd been caught staring at the sun. Callista sat beside me, still holding the air of someone accidentally witnessing a spiritual car crash. She leaned in, whispering, "I bet she'll try to reclaim the narrative in 10 minutes, max." I didn't reply. But Callista was right. To the second, Candace reappeared on the main deck, phone in hand. Her dress had been perfectly adjusted. Lipstick touched up. Her face was beaming but stiff, like wax. She stood at the railing, adjusted the camera angle, and began speaking in a velvet-lined voice. "Family is everything. And this place White Tidy's proof of that. To us, it's a space of tradition, loyalty, and enduring connection." I nearly laughed as the word loyalty slid from her lips like a fake flower falling from a cheap bouquet. Candace went on, eyes locked on the lens. "The people here today truly understand that. They're not just family by blood, but those who cherish the values built through love." Right then, a staff member walked behind her seemingly by accident and spoke just loudly enough to be picked up by the mic. "Would Miss Elena like more water? Thank you for returning to your own ship." Candace flinched. Not a full reaction, just the tiniest twitch, lips tightening for half a second. The image glitched slightly. Callista glanced at me. "Viral," she murmured. "I can hear the ad breaks already." I still didn't say a word. Because I knew. To unravel a lie, you don't need an argument. You just need truth to arrive on time. Candace cut the live stream faster than a click. And this time, she didn't come back to the deck. That afternoon, lunch was served on the mid-deck in thick silence. Normally, Candace would command the center seat like a seasoned conductor, orchestrating conversation. But today, her chair was empty. I sat down in the middle seat. The one reserved for the host. No one stopped me. No one dared. No greetings. No invitation. But that seat still belonged to me. Because I had built it. Dessert arrivada, passionfruit panna cotta with strawberry glaze. I didn't touch it. Neither did anyone else. They were too busy watching me. Or waiting to see who'd dare speak first. Finally, I broke the silence. Not loud. Not sharp. Just clear, even cutting through the stillness like silk tearing. "I think it's time I shared a few things about tradition. I think it's time I shared a few things." Every eye turned to me. Even Greg, seated across, set his fork and knife down. I opened the leather folder beside me, pulled out a page titled, "Preliminary Investment Agreement. White Tide Development." I placed it in the center of the table, where everyone could see. "This is the first investment contract for White Tide. Signed by me. Initial funds, also from me." I turned to the next page. "Land use permits. Construction license. Launch certification, all with my name at the top." No one interrupted. No one pulled out a phone. They just sat there, like people forced to stare at a version of truth they'd conveniently forgotten for years. I paused, glancing around. I'm not saying this to get credit. I'm saying it because I won't accept being edited out of a story told wrong and told without me. Greg swallowed hard. Callista's fingers didn't stop moving over her notes. My mother-in-law, seated beside Greg, just bowed her head, like someone finally realizing she'd handed the family's narrative to the wrong person for too long. I took a deep breath. Spoke softly, but each word settled on the table like stone. I don't need an invitation. I built this place. And I just reclaimed my voice. Lunch ended without applause. But I didn't need it. I had something far more powerful than praise. I had the lead role back in my own story. I didn't return to my cabin right after lunch. I stayed behind alone in the reading room by the glass windows overlooking the sea. The waves kept gently rolling, as if nothing had happened. Everything around me tried to maintain calm. Tablecloths perfectly straight, crystal glasses sparkling clean, sunlight slipping across the polished wooden floors like silk on water. But I knew everything had changed. And so did everyone else still aboard this ship. The atmosphere on the yacht slowed, turned cautious. Every move suddenly felt over-calculated. A chair, scraping softly against the floor, could make people flinch. Greg didn't say a word after lunch. He simply stood, nodded at me once, and retreated toward the rear deck. I didn't call him back. No need. A few hours later, when I returned to my room, a small piece of paper had been slipped carefully under the door. I opened it. Familiar slanted handwriting. I saw. I believe now. Oh. I didn't need a full name to know who it was. Olivia Gregg's mother. The woman who always stood tall, always protected her perfect family portrait at all costs. Not an apology. Not an excuse. Just a sentence. But it was enough. Enough to know she had seen. And, sometimes, the first step toward change is having someone finally look at the truth. I slid the note into my folder with the rest of the evidence. But that one, I placed at the front. As a sign. A beginning. That evening, Gregg knocked on my door. Not urgently. Not forcefully. He stood there holding an old ceramic mug, the one I always used at home, the one with the small crack near the handle. "I made tea," he said. "No sugar, the way you like it." I took the mug. Steam rose quietly between us. Guy sat beside me, silent at first. Then, finally, he spoke softly. "Elena, I think I always knew. Knew about Candace, knew how they treated you. But I chose not to look. I stayed quiet. I thought if I kept the peace, it would all pass. But I let them rewrite the story. While you were the one who built it." He swallowed hard. "I stood by while they erased you from something you created." For the first time, his eyes didn't avoid mine. There were no justifications, only the exhaustion of someone who'd realized that silence, held too long, becomes an act in itself. "I don't need an explanation," I said, still holding the mug. "I just need you to stop looking away." I bursing. He nodded. "I won't look away again. If you'll allow it. I want to fix the paperwork. Make it yours alone. No more joint ownership. No more hiding behind the label of family." I looked at him. Longer than a breath. Finally, I said, "This isn't about the paperwork. It's about being seen." Gregg understood. I knew he did because he didn't say another word. He just placed his own tea down and left the room, no plea, no request for forgiveness. I drank the tea to the last drop. Not sweet, but warm. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. Just calm. The calm of someone who stood up without ever raising their voice. The next morning, when I came up to the deck, a few people were already there. Callista was checking emails beside the coffee station. Maddie, Gregg's cousin, quietly placed another cup beside mine and said, without meeting my eyes, "I should have said something sooner. I saw what they were doing. I just didn't want to be the one who caused a stir." I nodded. "You said it now, that's enough." That was it. No tears. No hugging. Just a simple truth, genuine and unprompted, stronger than 100 scripted apologies. I returned to my cabin, opened the folder again. Not to review it, but to close it. I had proven what needed proving. And I didn't need to say another word. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't a side character. I was the voice. The one holding the pen. I didn't leave the ship. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I was no longer afraid that my presence might make someone uncomfortable. That morning, the sun was already up, but the air was tight like a pulled string. People still moved about, made small talk, exchanged polite laughter. But no one mentioned me. They didn't avoid me, but they didn't meet my eyes either. As if staying silent might fold everything away like a napkin hastily creased after a messy dinner. But some things can't be folded back. That morning, while I was making coffee, Candace entered the dining room. She wasn't wearing full makeup like usual. Her hair was tied low. Her dress slightly wrinkled. And for the first time since I'd met her, Candace wasn't wearing heels. We didn't greet each other. She walked to the table, poured herself a glass of water. As she turned, I saw her shoulders weren't held high and straight anymore. They sagged just a little. Not under the weight of shame, but under the exhaustion of having a mask torn off. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt clear. Gregg entered a few minutes later, moving slowly. He didn't say anything, just placed a printed sheet on the table in front of me. I unfolded it. It was the updated white-tied ownership record. Signed by him, transferring full control to me. I folded it back up and tucked it into my bag. Not because I needed it to win. But because I wanted it. As a final, legal punctuation mark on all those years, the truth was treated like dust on a windowsill. By midday, everyone was invited into the dining room for the final formal meal. They'd arranged everything perfectly, as if fresh tablecloths and flowers could erase what had happened. Candace stood up to speak. "Of course. Before we end this trip," she began, "I just want to thank everyone for being here. Family is the most important thing. And the people around this table today are a testament to that connection, to tradition, to... I stopped listening. Each word stretched too far, polished too smooth. Her voice, soft as velvet, felt hard as stone. When she paused to raise her glass, I stood. Not loudly. Not with anger. Just a quiet movement, my chair slipping back, my glass gently tapping the table. I have something to share as well, I said. Candace didn't sit. But her hand holding the glass twitched slightly. I pulled another printed page from my folder and placed it in the center of the table. All eyes followed. I spoke each word clearly. This is a transcript of a Zoom meeting between Candace and the family attorney 3 weeks ago. I pointed to a highlighted section. Elena is not blood. She shouldn't hold assets in the family's name. Not a single cough. Not a fork touched a plate. Stillness fell like stone. I continued. And here's the original investment contract proof that I am the sole founder. The one who laid the first foundation for this place. Not for credit, but so that the truth doesn't get erased from history. Greg looked down. His mother lowered her gaze. A cousin beside them let out a long, shallow breath. Candace said nothing. She stood frozen, lips pressed tight, eyes locked forward. But I could see it. Behind that calm stare. A tectonic shift she could no longer contain. I didn't wait for a defense. I folded the papers, slid them into my leather folder, and said, I don't need an apology. I don't need an explanation. I just need you all to understand that, from now on, truth doesn't need to be polite. I walked away from the table. No one stopped me. No one clapped. But behind me, the silence dropped like a boulder into shallow water. And when I turned to look back, Candace was still standing there, like someone who hadn't yet realized what she'd just lost. I returned to my cabin a little while after lunch. Not to hide, but to breathe in a space that was mine. A space where I didn't have to check my expression, soften my tone, or tiptoe just to keep someone else comfortable. I took off my shoes, sat on the bed, and opened the folder again. Not to check for mistakes. Not to prepare anything else. Just to feel, in my hands, the very thing they had tried to take from me. Control of the story. I ran my fingers over each page: bank statements, ownership certificates, investment contracts. Every sheet of physical proof of existence. Proof they once pretended not to see. Each page said to me, you weren't imagining it. You didn't invent the feeling of being shut out. It was real. And now, it can't be denied. A soft knock sounded at the door. I opened it. It was Olivia, Greg's mother. She looked smaller. Not physically. Not from age. But because the commanding air she always carried seemed to have slipped away. She didn't come in. Just stood in the doorway. Her dark eyes held the quiet clarity of someone seeing late but finally seeing. I didn't see it before, she said without preamble. But I see it now. I said nothing. Just nodded slowly. She nodded back, then walked away. No apology. No defense. But sometimes, a direct gaze means more than 100 excuses. That evening, the farewell dinner was held in the main dining room. Every year before, Candace had claimed the spotlight. Her place at the head of the table, her dress crease-free under the perfect light. But, this year, her seat sat empty. Guests were scattered, their laughter softer, their toasts more careful. Not the start of a vacation commercial, but the end of a quiet reckoning. No one asked why I was there. No one dared. And no one told me where I could or couldn't sit. I walked straight to the head of the table. Without an invitation. Without checking their reactions. I pulled out the chair. And I sat. Quietly. No one spoke. No one needed to. Because now, that chair belonged to no one else. Candace didn't appear. Greg sat 2 seats down, untouched plate in front of him. A few family members looked at Menno with judgment, but with recalculation. Like they were redefining me within the hierarchy they'd once built. I didn't blame them. They were simply learning. Learning to see me as a person with weight of her own. Not Greg's extension. Not the sister-in-law who tagged along. Not the event logistics coordinator. I didn't need a microphone. Didn't need a speech. My presence in that chair said more than any toast ever could. After dinner, I stepped out onto the rear deck, where the waves lapped gently against the hull, like a steady breath. Greg followed a moment later, keeping distance. Then came closer. Silent at first. Finally, he said, I always thought I was the one holding everything together. But now I realize I was letting it rot from the inside. I didn't answer. I let the wind do that for me. He exhaled. Thank you for not walking away. I turned to him, my eyes calm as the water. I did walk away. Just not from this place. From the version of myself you and your family tried to create. Greg nodded. No resistance. No excuse. I turned and walked back inside. Not to avoid him, but because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had reclaimed my seat. And from now on, no one would dare pull it from under me again. Not with silence. Not with sweet words. Not with dismissive glances. The next morning, the sea was unusually still. The water lay flat like glass, mirroring the pale gray sky, and faint threads of sunlight stretched thin like silk. There were no more murmurs coming from the kitchen. No more hurried footsteps chasing after Candace to ask, "What time does the party start?" The ship felt like it was holding its breath. Everyone walked more softly, spoke less, as if afraid of disturbing something that had already collapsed, not yet swept away. I woke early, pulled on a light gray cardigan, my hair simply tied back. I sat in the salon reading, but couldn't turn more than 3 pages. My eyes drifted to the deck, where Candace used to stand on mornings like this, in a white dress, hair curled, espresso cup in hand. Today, that chair was empty. Callista walked in, laptop and a stack of printed pages in her arms. She placed them on the coffee table and set it straight. I published it. I looked up. She continued, "The article. About you. About White Tide. About how a woman was erased from something she built, and how she reclaimed her voice." I didn't ask where she published it. I didn't need to. Callista turned her screen toward me. The title was sharp, strong as steel, soft as truth. The woman they tried to erase, and the legacy she took back. The article wasn't told in anger. It was told in evidence. In details people often overlook. The times my name was forgotten on guest lists. The words cut off mid-sentence in meetings. The eyes that dodged me when I walked into a room. It didn't paint me as a victim. It placed me exactly where I belonged. As the founder. As the one they tried to blur. And the one who came back clearer than ever. "I used your real name," Callista said, meeting my eyes. "If you want me to take it down, I will." I shook my head. "Number, leave it. It's time I stopped hiding." Callista smiled. "It's being shared everywhere. Mostly by women. They see themselves in your story." I nodded. "Good. It's time someone else stopped telling my story for me." That afternoon, I sat again on the rear deck. Greg joined Menno Performance, no pretense. He sat beside me, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes on the horizon like the ocean might finally give him the answer he'd been too afraid to ask. "I read the article," he said quietly. "I don't deserve to stand next to you." Not after all the years. I stayed silent. 1. I kept my gaze on the water. "You're right. You let them take my voice. For years. I want to do it right this time. Not to make it up. But to stop doing it wrong." I turned toward him, meeting his eyes. "I don't need someone to fix it for me, Greg. I already did." He nodded. For the first time, not trying to explain himself, not trying to justify. Sometimes, only when someone admits their failure through silence, do they finally become worthy of a second chance. That evening, I walked into the dining room. A few people were already seated. Maddie gave a small smile and motioned to the head of the table. This time, a true gesture. No pressure. No formality. I sat down, no invitation needed. They accepted me as something that had always belonged. Not a guest. Not Greg's wife. Just Elena. The one who built this place. The one who had been pushed aside. And returned with a steady voice. The conversation felt different. More real. No more sidestepping. A few people glanced my way as if to ask, "Are you okay?" But said nothing aloud. I didn't need them to. The way they listened differently was already the answer. That night, I sat alone on the deck. The breeze was light. The deck lights blinked softly along the rail. I didn't bring the folder. I didn't need it anymore. I no longer feared being silenced. Or having my name crossed out. Or being written into a supporting role in someone else's version of my story. Because I had rewritten it. With my own hands. My own voice. And evidence no one could deny. And the most powerful part? I didn't need to shout to be heard. All I had to do was stay. Stand firm. And never again let them pretend I didn't exist. I always thought endings came with applause, with teary apologies, or at the very least, a dramatic moment soaked in tears. But they don't. The real ending came in silence. Not a silence that excluded me, but one that acknowledged me. A silence that understood the old order had fallen. The next morning, the ship was preparing to head back to shore. I woke before dawn. No one called for me. No agenda, no schedule. Everyone let me be. I stepped onto the deck, holding a hot cup of black coffee in that old white ceramic mug. The one Candace once laughed at because it didn't match a five-star resort vibe. I smirked at the memory. Not all wounds are deep. But some cuts are fine and lingering. The kind that change you forever, simply because they were never properly named. Greg came out a few minutes later, hair tousled, t-shirt wrinkled. He said nothing. Just stood beside me. We looked out at the sea together. Not to reconnect, but to acknowledge. To admit all the things that had gone unsaid. To admit that silence itself had made us accomplices. Ronald called me this morning, Greg said, voice low and rough. He confirmed the transfer is done. White Tide's officially yours now. I nodded. Not joyful. Not emotional. Just lighter. Like a weight that had pressed on my chest for years had finally lifted. Greg looked at me like he was choosing each word carefully. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. Because I know. Sometimes apologies are just a way for the speaker to dodge the consequence. I turned to him, our eyes meeting. Not cold. Not soft. Just the gaze of someone who had learned their final lesson. You're right, I said quietly. But you can start over. Not with me. With yourself. He nodded. And for the first time, he didn't try to stop me. Didn't try to fix what was already broken. We sat there for a few more minutes, letting the sea breeze untangle the last knots of old emotion. And when I finally stood, Greg didn't follow. He understood. I returned to my room and packed my things. Not in a rush. I folded each item like I was wrapping up an older version of myself. The version that had once shrunk herself to fit into a family portrait she was never truly part of. I closed my suitcase. But before zipping it shut, I paused. Opened the small side pocket. And placed something inside. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. The handwriting was faded but clear. Don't fight for a seat. Build your own table. My dad wrote that for me on a day I can't quite recall. Maybe after a tense family dinner. Maybe after I came home feeling small, unseen. Whenever it was, today, it rang truer than ever. When the ship docked, there was no crowd. No one calling my name like a returning hero. But one thing was clear. I wasn't invisible anymore. Maddie was the first to spot me. She walked over and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. For not walking away at the beginning. Because of that, I see everything more clearly now. I smiled. Not a victorious smile, but a settled one. Because I knew. What I had changed wasn't just my place at the table. It was how people saw the truth itself. As I stepped onto the dock, Greg stood off to the side. He didn't run after me. Didn't try to stop me. He just stood there. One hand in his pocket, the other raised slightly, like a quiet farewell. I nodded back. No bitterness. No regret. I rolled my suitcase down the ramp. Its wheels steady, like a heartbeat no longer in panic. I had taken my place back. Not by yelling. Not by begging. But by sitting down, exactly where I should have been all along. And this time, I'm not giving up my seat. 3 days after I stepped off the ship, I hosted a small brunch at home. No grand announcement. No gold embossed invitations like Candace used to send. Just a simple message. Sunday morning. My place. Coffee, toast, and enough seats for anyone who doesn't need an invitation to feel welcome. Greg got the message. I didn't cross him off the list. But I didn't remind him either. Whether he came or not, that was up to him. All I knew was this. This time, I wasn't filling empty seats with people who shared the name but not the spirit. That morning, my little house smelled like warm fresh coffee, lemon bars from Callista, and the oiled cedar from a dining table I refinished myself last year. That table was a second-hand find from a liquidation sale, full of scratches and wear. But I sanded it down, layered it with paint, and now it stood strong. Just like me. Callista arrived first. She stepped inside, set the tray of lemon bars on the table, then took a step back and glanced around. You did all this yourself? I nodded. Anything worth keeping, you build yourself. She smiled. The article about you is spreading. Not just on social media, business magazines are picking it up. A few women entrepreneur groups reposted it too. I didn't pretend to be surprised. I didn't need to bow my head in gratitude like I used to. I simply said, the story is mine. And I just took it back. Maddie came next, carrying a box of fresh strawberries and a lighter gaze than I'd seen on her in years. She hugged me genuinely, no performance. It's been a long time since I felt like a family meal didn't come with rules. I pulled out a chair for her. No one follows rules here, not those kinds, anyway. Then Ronald arrived, the attorney who'd sent over the updated ownership paperwork. He didn't say much. Just rested his hand on the back of a chair and said, Sorry for the delay. I see things more clearly now. His wife came along, bringing a pitcher of mint tea. I looked around. Not a big house, not a large crowd. But every person was there because they chose to be. Not out of blood, not out of obligation. But out of real respect. Greg didn't come. And strangely, I wasn't surprised. Even stranger, I wasn't hurt. I poured the coffee, placed the juice pitcher in the center of the table, and watched as everyone talked. Honestly, unscripted, unfiltered. No one performing. No one proving anything. There were no speeches. No slow-motion toasts. Just broken laughter, half-told stories, and eyes that gleamed like people who knew they were exactly where they belonged. I looked at the table. Ran my hand across the wood. Each brushstroke of paint was a piece of me. And now, it was complete. Not Greg's family table. Not the banquet table where Candace delivered speeches like royalty. This was my table. And only those who know how to speak truth were welcome to sit here. I took a sip of coffee and smiled. Not because I won, but because I had stopped. Stopped in the right place. With the right people. In the right role. No applause needed. No public apology required. I had built my table. And this time, I wasn't asking anyone's permission to sit at it. That afternoon, after most of the guests had gone, sunlight poured through the kitchen window, soft and golden, peaceful. I stood alone in the kitchen, washing the cup Callista had used, the one with the faint lemon print. Warm water ran over my hands. It didn't feel cold like it used to when I stayed behind after Greg's family gatherings. This time, I didn't feel left behind. I was at the center. And I chose to stay. I dried my hands and walked past the dining room, where a few plates of fruit still sat untouched. There, among the napkins on the table, I saw a small folded piece of paper. I opened it. The handwriting was Maya's, Greg's niece, the only child in the family who had ever looked at me without judgment. She had written, You're the only one in our family who built everything on her own. Not because of who you're related to. Not because of who you married. But because you have courage. You made me believe I could dream. I folded the note, hands trembling just slightly. Not from overwhelming emotion. But because it was the first time someone had said out loud what I had always hoped someone might one day see. Maya called me a few days later. Her voice was clear and steady, like she'd practiced saying it all week. I'm applying to a startup mentorship program, she said. I want to build a free learning platform for students in town. Would you read my application, maybe? Give me some feedback? He smiled. No hesitation. Send it over. And if you want, you can use me as a reference. She went quiet for a beat. I could imagine her eyes welling up. Thank you. For not disappearing the way they expected you to. I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. The sun had faded, just one last thread of light stretched across the sky, like a final stitch closing a long, unfinished seam. There was a time, I said, I almost did disappear. But then I realized. The only person who could rewrite me back into the story was me. The following week, I received an email from a major publication. They wanted to interview me. Not as someone's wife. Not as the hidden founder. But as a woman who had reclaimed the right to define herself. Even in the face of erasure. I said yes. Not for the recognition. But for the thousands of women being cut out of their own stories every single day. Quietly, invisibly. And if my voice, finally steady, could help even one of them rise, then I would speak. Not permission. No apology. One evening, while cleaning out my office drawer, I found the old note again. Still there. Still my father's handwriting. Don't fight for a seat. Build your own table. I understood what he meant back then. But today, I understood it deeper. You don't need an invitation when you've built the entire room around the table. You don't need applause when you've created a self that cannot be erased. And you don't need to belong to someone else's family to matter. You are your own legacy. That night, I sat alone at my dining table. No guests. No camera flashes. No one live streaming. Just me. A cup of tea. And the wind whispering softly outside the window. I no longer ask for permission to exist. I exist firmly, rightfully, and finally, in my rightful role.